Hi, I'm Sophie Pearson, and I'll be doing a review of the distracted worker effect on hazard recognition and safety performance. So a little bit of background. Construction injuries are very common and costly. Fatal construction injuries increased by 27% from 2011 to 2015, which is when the study was done. And there were 200,000 non-fatal construction injuries in 2014, and the cost of construction accidents exceeded $48 billion every year. And then unsafe behavior and hazard recognition are key factors. Over 70% of construction accidents involve unsafe worker behavior, and 42% of construction injuries are linked to worker-related factors, including poor hazard recognition. And previous research shows that construction workers fail to identify a significant number of hazards in real work environments. So distraction is common in construction and is considered a major contributor to accidents. And theory suggests that distracted workers are more prone to accidents due to compromised hazard awareness and cognitively demanding tasks such as dual tasking, deplete mental resources, increasing the likelihood of errors and injuries. So to reiterate, their motivation is that many construction hazards go unrecognized, and distractions are common in dynamic work environments like construction. And past research has not examined how distraction affects construction workers' hazard recognition or safety performance. So their research hypothesis is that distracted workers recognize fewer hazards than undistracted workers. So this is a little bit about their methods, and then I felt like their methods were a little bit hard to follow, especially with how they set up the distracted and undistracted groups. So it's a little interactive after this. But basically, the goal of each trial was to have the participant identify all the hazards in 60 seconds that were in each case image. So there were a total of 70 participants, and each one was shown 4 different case images. And then each image had a set number of hazards that were previously identified by 17 construction experts. So the next slide is going to be the undistracted group. So if people can just like shout out hazards that they see in the image, that'd be great.
Flipping hazards on sawdust.
Yes, yeah, I saw that too.
A guard in front of the.
Yeah, I thought the saw blade was a pretty big hazard. I also noticed that the chemical, the wood adhesive, is stored improperly and there's no cap on it, which could be kind of a fire hazard or inhalation. Anything else?
Also a tripping hazard on that vent.
Yes, I agree. So this image was not from the study. I just kind of searched for images because the study didn't really give many examples. And these were just some hazards I identified, and then I also asked ChatGPT to identify a few. And so the next one is going to be the distracted group. Sorry, the mouse isn't working.
Whack it, you gotta hit that thing sometimes. It responds only to violence.
Okay, so same thing, identify all the hazards in the image. I kind of noticed the sparks right away as a potential like fire hazard. Anything else?
Same issue as the tripping.
Yep. Yeah.
Also the problem, that's hard to, much easier to do this in 3 dimensions than it is in a 2-dimensional picture.
Mm-hmm.
Wearing, I
Yeah.
don't know, from this distance, I have no idea. Crocodiles on the right.
hmm Yeah, so there are a few more hazards, but basically this was kind of the setup that I imagined from how they described it in the article. How they explained it was that for the undistracted group, they were shown a case image and then kind of like a blank placeholder for the videos that were considered the distractions. And then for the distracted group, they were shown various videos such as like nature, sports, while trying to identify a hazard in the case images. And this image is actually one they did use in their experiment, but I could only find an example of it using one of their citations that they used. And I also used AI to help remove the labeling of all the hazards in this image. So it did a pretty good job, but the like massive rod that goes across the screen is not actually there. This is the image that they were shown. So the first thing when I saw this image, I was like, wow, that's a lot of hazards to identify in 60 seconds, especially with kind of the quality of the image. And then the performance of each participant for each case image was determined by this equation, with HR image being the percent of hazards recognized compared to the total number of hazards that were identified by the experts. So just as like a simple example on the bottom, if the participant identified 5 hazards in the case image, but there were actually 10 that the 17 experts saw, then they would have a 50%. So then to reiterate, the research hypothesis is that distracted workers recognize fewer hazards than undistracted workers. And with all the collected demographic information, which was age and years of construction experience, they found that the two groups were not significantly different and were approximately normal. So they did a t-test. And from this test, the undistracted workers had a hazard recognition performance of 43%, and the distracted workers had a hazard performance of 35.52%, with the difference being about 7. So as you can see, the p-value is very small. So they found that distracted workers do recognize fewer hazards than undistracted workers. So this was kind of what they said as their discussion and significance in their paper, was that workplace distractions reduce the allocation of attentional resources to hazard recognition, leading to lower hazard detection, which could increase the chance of injury. It highlights the importance of reducing workplace distractions to improve safety, and emerging technologies like drones and wearable devices can pose risks. And when eliminating distractions isn't possible, managers should seek effective interventions like tailored safety training. So some conclusions that they found was that some study limitations were that the type and level of distraction wasn't measured, and it was assumed equal for all participants, and that construction workers normally are exposed to different types of distractions. There's visual, there's auditory, there's a combo. And then some future research they said was that they should explore various types of distractions and quantify the level of distraction at each personal level. So here's some pros and cons that I came up with, and then asked ChatGPT if they had any more. So some pros is that it's very relevant to real world safety, and kind of fills the gap of having empirical evidence on the relationship between distractions and hazard recognition. And then the use of video clips and set case images made it a very controlled environment that's easy to replicate. And then I felt like they had 70 participants, which to me is a large sample size for experiments of this type. But I guess depending on kind of your experimental setup, that might be less if it's just observational versus. And then for cons, there's a limited measurement of distraction and recognition accuracy. As they said, it assumes all participants are equally distracted, which overlooks the fact that workers might experience varying levels of distraction, and the lack of like quantifying how distracted somebody was might reduce the significance of the results. And then there's only one type of distraction video, and I didn't feel like it's necessarily similar to how you might be distracted in the real world, since it is like an artificial task environment and you're not going to have a huge video right next to a still image. And then there wasn't really a measure of cognitive load or like physiological factors that could determine how distracted they were, so kind of playing into one of the earlier ones. And then I thought this was a pretty big measurement, but there was no measure of each participant's safety training. So if somebody was, trained sooner or later, or how often, or if they received no safety training, to me impacts how well somebody's gonna recognize a hazard. And then I felt like it was hard to understand how the case images and videos worked together. And then these are some questions, but if anybody else has any.
I think this was a cool study, but I do think that it put the individual in sort of a vacuum, where there's other things that could be going on in that individual's life that also might be leading to distractions. Like sleep, for example. We know if construction workers or any workers aren't sleeping, they're going to have more cognitive failures, and then the next day or even the next month, they're going to be more distracted and have attention failures at work. So I guess my question to you, which doesn't really have a right answer, but if you could make this a bit more realistic and remove the individual from the vacuum and also take into account like their context, how would you do it?
I think I would potentially mark when they notice each hazard, because then you get more of like a gauge on what hazards jump out immediately versus which ones kind of fall through the cracks a little bit more. And then I feel like understanding the demographic information earlier and asking more questions, like how you said, how much have you slept? Like how often has somebody in your, like work, been injured recently, or when was your safety training? So I think just getting a few more data points to look at, I think would have been beneficial. Yeah.
So Dr. Leslie was very kind. The study is extremely flawed.
Yeah.
It's extremely flawed. There's a whole ton of confounders. You just talked about a couple, right? A ton of confounders. I haven't read it closely, but I'm trying to see, did they do random assignment to conditions even? I don't even know if I get that in here.
Yeah, they randomly assigned out of, I believe it was 16 case images, 4 to each participant. And then to pick the videos, they did a pilot study of 6 like research assistants to narrow that down as well. And then randomly assigned those.
So when I say deeply flawed, I'm mostly concerned about the confounds, right? I think from what you describe, it sounds like they did some of the right things in the design and in the carrying out of the project, of the study in that regard, but they don't account for sleep. They don't account for a whole host of psychological conditions that can lead to distraction, that are not that hard to measure either. Now,
Like preoccupation?
Yeah,
With
preoccupation.
something else?
Yeah. So are you thinking about anything else? Did your dog die recently? I mean, there's any number of things that could be artificially creating the distinction, and you got to rule that out, right? So anyway, so it's not really a question for you. It's just kind of a commentary that when not everybody's going to know everything. So it's like, okay, could they have measured everything? No. Would have been nice if they had taken into consideration some of the individual difference confounds. Yes. But I guess the question for me, and maybe this is for the group and for you, is what can we learn from this besides that it wasn't done well?
If I don't mind, before we get to that, which is,
Okay.
if I can with a little prerogative. What would have helped to address, because there's a randomization, what is missing in this report that would have helped address the concerns of Dr. Allen?
I think adding more, kind of like how I said, like data points, like they only used one performance metric. And I feel like adding a few more of those might have helped kind of distinguish between just like, did you see them, yes or no? And then, yeah, I think kind of, getting more background, I think.
But what would you look for? This is for everybody. What would you look for in this paper that would have helped mollify the line of questioning about confounders? What's missing? Big notes too. Talk about journal club after journal club after journal club. Missing the descriptive variables to compare the two groups.
Yep.
Because if they have ages the same in both, and so forth, it's missing all these factors. Had that been there, that's not a total answer, but it's a partial or substantive answer to the line of questions. West.
Yeah.
And why it's not here, I have the foggiest.
Yeah, I mean, whenever you do an experiment, you have conditions.
Yeah.
And it looks as though they collected some of these demographic variables. So it'd just be a matter of, you have it's table one.
Mm-hmm.
And that's that by itself would help a lot.
Yeah.
It certainly wouldn't solve all the issues, but, it would help a lot. It'd help it enough to, it got published, so, whatever.
Yeah.
Oh, it's only semi-public. That's an issue here. It's a research congress, and what I don't know is to what extent they peer review this sort of thing. There are some proceedings where, especially medical informatics, where the highest level of communication is in their conference proceeding, more so than the journal article. But most of them, that's fairly peer reviewed.
Yeah, and I do know they expanded on this later and looked into a few more things, but I didn't look at that article too deeply. But
Joe asked a great punchline question.
Oh.
The one I upworded. I wanted to get to the table one.
Oh,
You asked,
what can we learn from
we learn?
this? Even without some of the information that would kind of help us feel more comfortable about their conclusion.
I felt like even though it did miss quite a few things, like it does kind of expand on just like, distracted workers do identify hazards less. And kind of like a setup of some, like as an option for an experimental protocol or a way to kind of assess how somebody might react when they're distracted versus not distracted. I felt like that was kind of my main takeaway is like this is an option of how you could go about doing it with kind of having a case image with, hazards and then some sort of distraction.
Other thoughts? I mean, because one thing I want to say about process is we did a great job presenting this.
Okay.
This is not, and you've been answering all these questions and you actually don't have to.
Okay.
Okay, your job is to present it, and if you feel like you have something to add, absolutely answer the question. But this is actually questions for everybody, or this is supposed to be a discussion. We don't want anyone who presents an article to feel like they have to defend somebody else's research that was garbage in some cases, right? So, others, what do you think? What else? Great answer. I agree. What other things could we pull from this? If you said, I really am excited about this. What else could we learn from this?
I would say the value of interdisciplinary teams because, an OHP is going to identify something more readily than someone from another discipline, and having some feedback and evaluation of methods from an interdisciplinary team would identify a lot of issues before the research is conducted.
And aren't we an interdisciplinary audience? So I'm guessing there's an industrial hygienist in here who'd be like, well, what about this? And or it's a safety person say, well, what about that? And that's okay. But what Bob was saying is really important, and that's why we don't wanna rely entirely on the person who's just presenting the article to talk about stuff, because we actually wanna hear, what do you guys think about this from the disciplinary perspective you have, because we're an interdisciplinary group here. I just putting that out there because I don't want anyone to feel like we're coming at you with all the hard questions that the authors should have answered.
I guess for me, on the very first or second slide, it says 70% of all accidents are caused by unsafe behaviors. That was a huge red flag for me. I mean, that's traditional thinking. So why do those unsafe behaviors exist? Are they allowed to exist? Are they performing because they're allowed to do that? So whenever I see that, it's like a huge red flag. So I would say early in the presentation, you already had me thinking. So,
Is that a red flag for you? I mean, why is that a red flag?
because then you have to really kind of dive into why do those unsafe behaviors exist? Is it leadership allowing it? Is it the worker performing the way they think the supervisor wants him to perform?
Yeah.
You get into this whole leadership issue.
Yeah, leadership and the system itself.
Yeah.
Is it designed to encourage bad, unsafe behavior, or encourage the community to engage in unsafe behaviors? I'm just thinking about other.
Or even the types of behaviors, because there's safety participation, safety motivation, safety compliance. It could be an issue with any of those three.
Yeah.
I have another question for the group. This is not something I'm an expert in, but you wrote on the slide that wearables could be a distraction. And like a few weeks ago, we had Journal Club where 2 people presented on exoskeletons. And I'm wondering the balance between exoskeletons being helpful and exoskeletons being distracting, right? So kind of combining these 2 presentations. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that or research or knows of any research on
Where's our exoskeleton
exoskeletons
people?
as research.
It's GVW, yeah.
Uh,
I guess I know very little about exoskeletons, but I, do know people that work with them. And in my opinion, it's just kind of something that it's another thing to think about. Or like, just like another like, oh, something's touching my leg while I'm doing, XYZ, or like, I think also with like the drones and how they brought that up, it's supposed to be beneficial for, different workplaces, but also like, I don't know, I definitely notice when like a drone is flying overhead, in a public space, like you still hear it, you still kind of see it in your peripheral, and it is a little distracting. Yeah.
So, I mean, if we go back all the way to the beginning of this, the whole hypothesis is really that distraction results in more problems, right? And is that new or novel?
Nope.
I think we've all experienced it. Let's see, who has not experienced some noise going off in the car, kid misbehaving, you misbehaving, me misbehaving, whatever. You know what I mean? And you can see this happening. So if we already know that, then that goes back to this, what is really new or novel? And let me point out something else, which is if you wanted to really design this better, we already talked about collective variables. So forgetting the confounder issue for a moment, what would you do differently?
I guess, well, the reason I thought this was kind of interesting is because I'm looking at kind of contact with objects and how different types of like falling objects or like startles impact how somebody moves like biomechanically. And I feel like what I think is interesting about that is trying to quantify if somebody actually like perceives it and how they impact it, how it impacts them based on, how much they move, or, using like EEG if their brain, focuses on that one thing and then goes back to the task, then it's actually something that you can, I guess, see other than, oh, they didn't see it versus they did see it. So I think that would be a little more interesting in my opinion.
Photos.
I think I would, if I was using AI, I feel like I would try and make more of a interactive space. than just still photos, just because I don't feel like photos are very applicable to real world environments. But there are still like drawbacks to AI environments with depth perception and different things like that.
So Patrick and the mining and safety folks are heavy into VR. VR is something we actually talked about the faculty integrating more because it's the only way really to do rapid, recognition of conditions immediately dangerous to health life. So, that would be one consideration is using really different method. 2018, they could have done that.
Once, going twice, gone.
Like, I don't really know how to.
Me. Hello, hello, hello. Is that better? Can you hear me? Cool. Okay. So, good morning. I guess it's the afternoon. Good afternoon. Today I'll be presenting a comprehensive analysis on glyphosate. Yeah, so here we go. Glyphosate is one of the most widely used herbicides worldwide, and it has been most widely used, or I guess it has been subject to ongoing controversy regarding its health risks and benefits in agriculture. This presentation will break down the key findings of the study, covering its methodology, results, regulatory perspectives, and future implications. Okay, so a little introduction. The debate surrounding glyphosate centers on two main issues: its potential health risks and its significant role in agriculture. Some of the studies suggest a link between glyphosate and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which others argue there is no conclusive evidence providing the connection. On the other hand, glyphosate has been instrumental in boosting agricultural productivity, reducing costs, and ensuring food security. The study by Beretti calls for a comprehensive balanced risk benefit study and assessment rather than selective risk avoidance. The goal is to ensure the regulatory decisions are made based on complete, transparent, and evidence-based evaluations. So a little bit of background on glyphosate. Glyphosate is a broad-spectrum herbicide. It is used extensively in agriculture to control weeds and improve crop yields. It has been classified as probably carcinogenic by the International Agency of Research on Cancer, the IARC, yet regulatory agencies such as the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, and the European Food Safety Authority, EFSA, have not classified it as a carcinogen. This inconsistency in regulatory standards has led to global debates, lawsuits, and even bans in certain regions. Despite the concerns raised, glyphosate is still widely used because of its efficiency in controlling weeds and in positive impact on agricultural productivity. So next, a little bit on the methodology and the data. Yeah.
Just quickly, the trade name, just because not everybody may know the trade. So because everybody probably would recognize it.
Trade name for glyphosate?
Yep.
Oh, Roundup?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Roundup.
Roundup.
I figured that one out quickly.
Right on.
Now everybody knows and they all got.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we all have it.
Yeah, it works well.
It works well.
Gets it done for sure. Right on. The study by Beretti used a narrative review approach and analyzing a decade's worth of peer-reviewed research on glyphosate. It considered studies on glyphosate's health effects, particularly its linked to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, while also evaluating its role in agriculture. The study incorporated epidemiological data, occupational exposure levels, as well as regulatory frameworks to ensure a comprehensive analysis. Additionally, it examined the global regulatory landscape to understand the inconsistencies in risk assessment between different agencies. So here's a couple maps showing the usage of glyphosate on the left over the last 30 years. So this is where we started 30 years ago, and this is where we are now. And then on the right, it shows the change in life expectancy over the last 30 and 60 years. So yeah, kind of interesting. The darker blue regions on the pesticide map, notably the US, parts of South America, India, and China, all have a high usage. And then the life expectancy along those areas has definitely increased as well. And I don't feel like it's a direct correlation. I just feel like with the advancements in technology we have, as well as advancements in medicine, is probably the key factors to those. But it definitely probably hasn't had an impact on reducing, I would say, I guess there's been an increase in food because of glyphosate. So there's been less malnutrition and just more people are getting fed. So I'd say that's probably the correlation, in my opinion. Reese. Next are some key findings and health risks. So one of the central concerns about glyphosate is its potential link to cancer, specifically non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Some of the epidemiological studies suggest that long-term high-level exposure may be associated with an increase of developing this type of cancer. However, there is an inconsistency in the data, with some studies showing no statistical significance correlation. Beretti's study suggests that the challenge of providing causation, while some research indicates a possible association, the data lacks uniformity, and factors such as exposure levels, genetic predisposition, and other environmental variables complicate the analysis. Some key findings touching on agricultural benefits. Despite the concerns, glyphosate has had undeniable benefits in agriculture. The study found that in some regions, crop yields increased by up to 20% due to glyphosate. The herbicide has also played a role in reducing production costs for farmers, making food more affordable and accessible. Without glyphosate, alternative weed control methods, such as mechanical weeding or alternative herbicides, could increase costs, lower efficiency, and potentially impact food security. The study argues that banning glyphosate without viable alternatives could have unintended economic and social consequences, particularly for small-scale farmers and developing countries. And then some regulatory perspectives on this. So regulatory agencies worldwide have taken different stances on glyphosate. In 2015, the IARC classified glyphosate as a probable carcinogen, a designation that sparked widespread concern. However, the classification has been based on hazard identification rather than risk assessment. In contrast, agencies like the EPA and the EFSA, which consider actual exposure levels and risk analysis, have found no compelling evidence that states glyphosate possesses a cancer risk when used as directed. The inconsistencies in the evaluation has fueled lawsuits, public distrust, and calls for stricter regulations or outright bans in certain countries. Here's some alternative solutions and challenges that have been addressed. So this study also explores potential alternatives to glyphosate, such as nano-based herbicides, biostimulants derived from natural compounds. These alternatives are promising but remain in early stages of research. One of the biggest challenges with these alternatives is scalability. Glyphosate is highly cost effective and highly cost effective, whereas emerging alternatives may be more expensive and less accessible for large scale farming. Additionally, the long-term health and environmental impacts of these alternatives are not yet fully understood. The study emphasizes that the need for further research before moving away from glyphosate. There is a need for it before moving away from glyphosate completely. Here we go, a little bit of risk-benefit assessment. So Beretti advocates for comprehensive risk-benefit assessment rather than selective risk avoidance. He argues that regulatory decisions should be based on transparent and data-driven approaches. Considering both the health risks and the agricultural assessment include better exposure analysis, long-term epidemiological studies, and more consistent regulatory evaluations worldwide. And that's what I got. Here's some questions that I kind of came up with and had ChatGPT help me formulate after reading through this. So we could either go through these, or if anyone has any questions, speak now or forever hold your peace. Cool. So the first one I had is, why do regulatory agencies such as the IARC, the EPA, and the EFSA reach different conclusions on whether glyphosate is carcinogenic? And what does this say about reliability of scientific risk assessments?
So, good questions. I was still processing
Yeah, no worries.
previous. Do you have questions? Question. I'm now ready. Sorry.
Go ahead.
So I'm not really familiar with toxicology reports as a journal. This is a literature review, but I know in a lot of journals, when we do a literature review or a review and extension type thing or a meta-analysis, that sort of thing, there's usually some more robust description of where you got the studies you're reviewing, right? And so I'm not taking away from, they're welcome to write whatever they want, but I'm not sure I could replicate their review.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
How did, they say, well, inclusion criteria, but I'm thinking about the person I'm sitting next to, Katie, who's doing a dissertation, and she did a literature review, and she has like a step-by-step process to find the articles. And that actually goes into her paper, right? We expect that. And so just, again, I'm not familiar with this journal. Maybe this is normal to have something like this kind of approach. But even if it was a case study, it seems a little less rigorous and more, this looks neat. Let me review this part and this part and this part, right?
Totally.
And maybe not review some of the other things that are contrary to what they were eventually concluding. I mean, could be wrong, but
yeah,
light in terms of that methodology. I don't know. Did you feel that way, or did others feel that way when they looked at that, or just?
I feel like I noticed that as well. I feel like there could have been some picking and choosing of what they wanted to see or what they wanted to analyze instead of more broadly analyzing it. I don't know for sure.
Do you happen to do a dumpster dive into any other systematic reviews or meta-analyses to see what risk estimates are out there?
I did not, unfortunately. But
that's okay. I just very quickly pulled one up. Now, mine was published in 2021, and I specifically look for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Okay. And so the combined analysis says relative risk for ever exposure to glyphosate is 1.05, 5% increased risk. Of course, not at all statistically significant.
Yeah.
And so, the cut and chase version is, would I not buy another
Thing of Roundup.
container of Roundup? I'm with Patrick. It works really well. That doesn't mean I don't support doing more research.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? And the reason I brought that up as a follow on to Joe's comment is I think he's right. This is, doesn't have quite the same robustness that pulling together a bunch of studies to do a systematic review and meta-analysis, especially because the outcome of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is a very specific outcome. It's pretty easy to measure and categorize,
Gotcha.
So your estimates for that will end up, your only problem with that is if you don't have a population-based sample, you have a bias sample that's the primary limiter.
But we can go back to your questions.
That's all good.
I was gonna say a funny thing because I thought that this was going to be a comprehensive risk benefit assessment based on the title and the way it started talking about it, and then the end goal was, okay, now I'm gonna make a call for a comprehensive risk benefit assessment. So I thought that was kind of funny. Anyways, what were you saying?
Oh, I was just gonna say that, you asked the first question, why do different regulatory agencies reach different conclusions on whether glyphosate is carcinogenic? And I don't know, who's paying IARC or EPA or EFSA folks, dare I say that there are corporate interests in most of these agencies, at least a little bit, and so they may or may not come to those conclusions in the same way or for the same reasons. So that I could be wrong and probably am wrong, but that's my thought there. So that's why, these independent assessments that you then pull together to do a meta-analysis or whatever makes me more comfortable with concluding, something from it than this more opinion piece.
Totally.
So,
Next question. If glyphosate were banned worldwide today, what short-term and long-term effects would this have on global agriculture and food security?
What is the main driver for the increase in or reduction in malnutrition? Okay, so I'm old enough to remember in the 1970s, kids really were starving around the world. Patrick remembers this, and probably everybody else is too young, but I mean, it was a major problem.
sorry, Kurt.
It's there's a reason USAID actually was an important, thing at that time. But why? What are the number 1, 2, 3 drivers for why we don't have that problem today? And is this one of the reasons or not?
That's a good question. I'm assuming it's just because food is more readily available and it's a lot cheaper. I don't know.
Okay.
People don't have to grow their own food. You can just go buy it at the store.
I mean, even third world, it's not a problem. People know why. We're not planting the seeds we used to. We've got genetic hybrids. That's right. It's all modified. And so you get 2 years of corn instead of 1. And that's the big driver of the increase in productivity. It's not the glyphosate.
And those ears are 2 feet long instead of 1 foot long, and they've got, twice as many kernels, and they're bigger, and, I had it kind of look up on the farm, these are changes that I saw even just in the short time I was there, about from when I first remember corn to when I see it now, very different. Like when I was younger, not just because I was shorter, but when I was younger, the corn was taller. But it was they've modified it to use less energy towards height and more energy towards producing, corn, the ears, right? And so those are kinds of things. So I wonder, and as Kurt was saying, is the use of glyphosate a key driver of food security, right? Is that helping these genetically modified things that we now eat and brew and so forth, is that really helping that? And if it is, if we were to take that away, and you were talking about earlier about replacements, what alternatives do they have? We're going to go down on our hands and knees and start pulling weeds again, which I did that growing up, right? So it's an interesting question, and they don't answer that here and I don't think they intended to either, but
Yeah.
it's an interesting question.
AI says no. So caution, warning flags, sirens going off. Genetic breeding's number one, widespread use of fertilizers, 2, irrigation practices, 3, pest and disease management is 4, and 5 is improved farming techniques, none of which is glyphosate. I'm still a fan of glyphosate. It's the only thing to quickly get rid of the weeds.
Third, would encouraging the general population to grow their own food reduce our dependence on large-scale agriculture and chemicals like glyphosate? Or is that an unrealistic solution for global food security?
What do you think?
I think it'd be sweet to live on a farm and grow your own food and have animals, but I know that it's not very viable for most people because you have to work to make money, and it's not like everybody's going to drop everything and just become a farmer.
Or have the land to become a farmer?
Exactly.
These large scale farms that currently exist used to be all, small scale farms. They used to be family farms that all sold over time, for various reasons. And so it's only unrealistic because I don't think there's an easy way to go back to the family farm, without somehow getting those large scale farms to break up. And with property rights in at least in this country, with property rights and so forth, it'd be hard. It's more likely you could get people to plant a tree in their backyard, maybe.
Mhm.
I don't even think you need the space though, because there are a ton of people that live off the land just in urban living, right?
Okay, yeah, sure.
But the problem is the amount of prep it takes to have wheat, right? And to turn that into flour. And so
Right.
it's,
Sure.
yes, the work, but in time of working and making a living. But people are so used to the convenience of a fast food burger that our society isn't willing to go back to that lifestyle, right? Like to go back and grind your own wheat and make things naturally and more healthily. I don't think there are obviously people doing this, but I don't think as a society, people want to do that, which it would be much healthier for society to go back to those ways. But I think McDonald's is kind of ruined us all.
It's so tasty though.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to go drive and get a burger instead of grind your own wheat and
Make-
make bread and then
Right.
slaughter a cow and make some ground beef. That is true. It would be fun though. Who knows?
Sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt.
go ahead.
Comment or question from Noah online. He says, back to question 1. I wonder if different regulatory agencies have differing processes for coming to conclusions on carcinogenicity. Other IARC groups, carcinogens, and ACGIH classifies them A1 through A5. But how they come to those conclusions could be different. For glyphosate, maybe one agency leaves an aspect out in their analysis. It would be important for glyphosate specifically. So just comment on that.
Thank you, Noah. Next, are legal battles and lawsuits influencing scientific research and regulatory decisions more than objective data? Kind of similar to question 1. Where's the money?
I kind of go back to what was said earlier about, I think what influences more than legal battles and lawsuits are lobbying efforts. And then those lobby efforts promote, if you take a lawsuit in, the common thing in corporate USA is, or corporate America, is that you settle those lawsuits, right? So like you brought up the lobbying efforts very early, and I think that has more of an influence than a legal battle or a lawsuit.
That's kind of what Elon Musk is doing right now. He's going for all the lobbyers.
Who?
Do it. Elon Musk.
Oh.
I don't know who that is.
Who? Never mind.
Anything else?
Only other comment that the whole situation by itself is is a jury verdict evidence of fact, other than the fact that they found Bayer guilty? No. They pick the battles in the jurisdictions they're likely to win the cases. Now the level of the jury pool in some of those areas can be down to, just anybody who's got experience there saying, your jury questionnaire, you get out of the jury. So it can be a bunch of people who have zero college level experience. You could have functionally 8th grade education kind of stuff on the entire jury, and purely emotion driven.
You're not wrong.
It's a crapshoot.
Our legal system's interesting, but what we got. Okay, and then lastly, should glyphosate regulations focus more on protecting agricultural workers who have a higher exposure level rather than banning it for general population? Yeah.
As
Those are fighting words.
as a Rocky Mountain Center Occupational Environmental Health interested in the workers' well-being perspective, we should probably take care of the workers. And then maybe if they had good evidence to ban it, if it was 5% and significant, not 5% and not, if it was 20%, if we had the actual evidence to prove, with real data, not just a very strong opinion, then banning the population might make sense. But it's always going to make sense to this audience to take care of the worker, right? Whether that be through regulations or, providing better, PPE that reduces or eliminates, ideally, right, the exposure, right? So I'm all for that for sure. The banning in the general population, because that no chemical is really probably good for us, in high exposure levels. That's what we study in things here. But in the general population, I think it's a little harder. I think you have to have the better evidence than what they're pulling together for this opinion piece. That's my opinion. If you ask my opinion, or you ask all of our opinion, I'm doing just talking.
So there's a new commercial on TV, and I was just looking up, so spruce, safe for people and pets, right? And so obviously, I don't know if it has glyphosate in it or not, but it's I've heard a lot of commercials that they talk about safe alternatives for Roundup, but then the question goes back, do they work? Not nearly as well.
And if you're a farmer, what are you going to use? I mean, you guys spray larger areas and stuff like that. You're going to spray them out of a cab. Their cabs right now are pretty luxurious. It's almost like going down the field with a self-contained breathing apparatus. So, in some regards, you have to wonder if the highest exposures aren't in the people like me.
Or in the people who live next to those fields. Like I think my folks who have a hobby farm that I lived on and so forth, and all around them are fields of corn or beans, depending on the year. And they come out and they spray. And there are years when with the way the wind's blowing, right, it damages their trees. Well, if it's damaging their trees, that means it's also probably exposing the rest of the yard and them. And homes are homes built such that they filter out these sorts of things. And
It's inactivated, but when it hits the soil, I've heard that that's true.
What'd you say?
Is it inactivated when it hits soil?
That we could look it
I've
up
heard
though.
that. If that's true, that addresses some questions.
Yeah.
Does it when you spray it, and if you ever get it on like one of your plants or something, does it kill that as well?
Oh yeah, it's really good.
kills everything.
Yeah, if you make a mistake and you mix up bottles of what you're spraying, and you think you're
Bye garden.
bye, unless you wash it off really fast.
Your process. Well, Roundup works good, and so does this. So let's put them together. Please don't. Please don't do that.
Well, if you know, so that brings up a story of one of my sisters who heard that something really good at killing dandelions, and she was wondering why she had these brown circles all over.
Yep.
That's what the name is.
Doesn't just kill dandelions.
Toots, that's her nickname. Toots. I can explain this. Pretty simple.
Right on. That's all I've got. Thank you.